there. In the last part of this series, I covered some fundamental ideas to existing and orienting to our existence on this planet. And I covered that one of the greatest ways I think that we can do this is through attachment, which is the connection that we have with others on this planet, beginning with our caregivers from birth, maybe even in utero, and then that translating and transferring onto our intimate partnerships, our friendships, and those who we really seek after for our daily lives. I wanted to cover these foundational concepts so we can move forward together as we look into how breakups and other attachment loss can create a crisis of existence and maybe even a loss of identity of the self within our time on this planet. Today I'm going to cover some more heavy hitters, but at first I want to confess to you that this is a subject that's so vast and powerful and important. It has a ton of angles and themes as I keep reading about it and looking into it myself. I'm still learning and I'm putting as much together as I can for you and me. But I just want you to know that, hey, there is a lot out there, and I probably am just chipping away at the iceberg. Today I want to look at attachment and trauma, and how those things can affect our sense of self within the world. How trauma, namely trauma that has to do with the loss of a loved one, the loss of those important connective figures in our world, can be a catalyst for crisis of existence, including what I consider to be the greatest response to this type of crisis of existence, which would be, I don't want to be here anymore. I don't understand what the point of all this is. So suicidality. Trauma is any subjectively felt, upsetting, or confusing event, and traumatic events can cause many important phenomena to occur within the body and the brain. I believe trauma can be a front runner in subconscious and conscious thoughts, including visceral, right? So in my body, feelings regarding my existence. And if I'm already predisposed to consciously and cognitively observing life in a philosophical way, trauma may cause me to wonder even more about it, like Viktor Frankl did, a man who went through the Holocaust and lost his wife in a concentration camp and ended up writing the book Man's Search for Meaning, right? So he's taking his trauma and the loss of his attachment, and he's actually trying to make meaning of it. Being hurt traumatically by an attachment loss, like a breakup with an intimate partner, or the death of a loved one, or even being traumatized by circumstances, maybe even those that we create of our own volition, it may not only cause me to go through the grief process, right? Like, so we think of the Kubler-Ross model, we think of denial, bargaining, sadness, anger, and we now know that those can come in different waves, not a chronological pattern. It might not just have us going through that. It might also have us going intermittently with anger and sadness and all of these things. We might also experience that deep existential crisis. What's the point of my life crisis? That hopelessness that can come with the loss of a person in our world that gave us a sense of security. The DSM-5, which is the Diagnostical Manual of Mental Health Disorders, shares a couple things that I want to talk to you about as far as attachment and children. The first one is reactive attachment disorder, and the second is disinhibited social engagement disorder, both occurring in children and are often a result of neglect or a lack of proper caregiver connection, which we need to adaptively attach to others. Reactive attachment disorder is going to show more of a pulling away from caregivers because I haven't bonded correctly. So maybe now I live with healthy caregivers who want to bond with me, but because I've been neglected or traumatized or had such a maladaptive connection experience with my first caregiver, now I don't know how to bond and I don't know how to be maybe a healthy ego on the planet, and my healthy ego does not have a clue how to connect or bond to your ego. So we see that we have a reactive attachment maybe through really dysregulated emotions. So I might get angry at and oppositional at times that are not calling for that type of reaction. Those children, we might see a lot of shame-based thinking, guilty feelings, things like that. And then disinhibited social engagement disorder is going to be the opposite of that, right? So this way, I'm going to be like seeking with no inhibition. I'll go home with a stranger type of attachment style where I'm needy and I'm clingy and I'm really going toward people that maybe I even shouldn't. And this is also based on neglect and a poor a maladaptive way of connecting with others. And I wanted to share those two things, those two concepts, those two diagnoses with you, because I want you to recognize with me that trauma of attachment can really already begin to disorient us to how we are adaptively to be connecting with others. So we really need those healthy connection concepts, those healthy understandings in our mind to put the puzzle together of how I am to be on this planet. So under the same category of trauma and stress, we see PTSD, acute stress disorder, and we see the adjustment disorders. And one interesting diagnostic feature of adjustment disorders is that they say in the DSM that one event that could lead up to it, a termination of a romantic relationship, and of course this can also be like consideration for this adjustment diagnosis could be losing a loved one to death. And so here we see marked distress, we see significant impairment in social, occupational, and other important areas of functioning. We may see depression, anxiety, or both. We may see poor conduct, or again, those maladaptive behaviors. Those could be emotionally dysregulated or reactive ways of responding to people around us. This is saying a person is not adapting well to life after something significantly changed in their homeostasis, right? So that's meaning their familiar way of living, thinking, and feeling. I'm disoriented to my norms, and I have to find the new norm, and I'm not really sure what that is yet because I've just lost this person and everything just went, like you just dumped the trash can out on my life and I'm trying to piece it all back together. So even more interesting, the next category after trauma and stress related disorders comes dissociative disorders, and within that are depersonalization and derealization disorders, where we see a loss of a sense of self. And the DSM even describes this with verbiage like, this is I am no one, or I might say I have no self. The DSM also describes how panic attacks can lead to those feelings of dissociation or feeling dissociative, like an out-of-body experience. Some people experiencing this depersonalization or derealization have told me that they feel like they're watching a movie of themselves, and then they're not really there. Recently, I had someone say that to me, feeling like I'm in your office, but I'm not really sure that I'm in your office. I really don't feel like I'm here. And this is going to be an area where I'm going to try to help that client be mindful of, and ground themselves and really feel the chair and really be present in the moment and notice that they really are here. I might have them orient and say their name and the date and the time, and I might even have them say a few things about themselves that they absolutely know about themselves, because I want you to come back down to your earth. I want you to reorient yourself to your body. Come back to your body. Deep attachment losses such as losing a dear family member or friend to death is one way a person may experience this disorder. And of course, this is on a spectrum of mild to severe, because within dissociative disorders, we have a very large spectrum of how reactions can be. Sadly, many of these occurrences can lead to suicidal thinking. It's here when the existential crisis and the ways that crisis is affecting the body and the mind can get dark and ugly very quickly. So often in patients that I'm seeing experiencing the responses of trauma, especially attachment trauma, they also seem to experience deeply guilty or shameful feelings or a dread of tomorrow feelings. And it's vital for the therapist to watch the client who's experienced some kind of attachment loss for this reason, and it's imperative that we have a care plan for that client. And here it becomes vital that when the individual who's experiencing attachment loss with that crisis of existence piece is grounded by other loving supporters. So with a client who's a teenager or a child and they've had experience of complex loss, complex trauma, which is right, it's like layered trauma. I'm gonna really speak to that parent, and I'm gonna go, hey, I need some serious support here for this teen. I'm on team client, you're on team client. Let's get a multidisciplinary team around this client and make sure that they know that they are grounded in the intersubjectivity of all of us around him or her, and recognize that they exist, they're loved, they're worthwhile, they're noticed, they're seen, and all of that good attachment stuff, that helpful glue that keeps them recognizing that they are not just floating around in space feeling, which I'll talk about in a minute. But I want to help them recognize their self again, their identity, help their feet touch the floor and stay there. And this is one reason that, again, I'm gonna look at that support system as much as possible for that individual. So I want to share this, and then I'm going to wrap up part 2 of this series because I don't want this video to go on for too long. In my experience, after deep and important attachment loss, first of the divorce of my parents, but then especially my own divorce after a marriage of 10 years, I couldn't seem to find the floor, and I call that the floating in space feeling. And I recognized this feeling long before grad school, long before I was a counselor and did research or had word containers for all of these ideas. But I did call it a floating in space feeling because I remember this disoriented feeling of just this loss of my marriage and this loss of this person that I knew and who knew me, and we valued each other. And now suddenly, you know, the rug's been pulled out, the plug has been pulled, however you want to see it, and I'm totally in this space of who am I. I'm experiencing the identity loss, and I'm experiencing the existential crisis, and I'm experiencing the disorientation because now my whole life's been pragmatically changed, but the way my brain is being wired and having to process novel new information from the shock of this divorce has really got me, or it did get me, so thinking in ways that I didn't know that I would have to. For instance, I want to share this with you. I remember thinking, like, who am I supposed to date now? Do I date young guys? Do I date older guys? Like, how does this work? Just very disorienting, and I felt like the whole book of life just got kind of thrown out the window. Luckily, my faith and my support system held me to the ground quite deeply, and I'm going to tear up because I realize how big of a deal that was in this moment. But it's so important to have that structure around you when you're going through this type of loss. So anyway, yeah, it feels like the whole book of life gets thrown out and you're going, how do I do this? So I just want to like validate that with you if you are experiencing that. Just how the brain has to rewire itself and has to plug itself back into new neural pathways and recognition of how to do this. It's a very normal process, but I do want to always experience with you that this crisis of existence that comes up, and how it's so important to constantly and consistently recognize that even though you don't feel like your life matters, or you really feel like it's hopeless or everything is hopeless right now, I just want to share with you, you can borrow this from me, like I said in my last video, until you can believe it for yourself. You do matter. You will come back down to earth, and I want to keep doing these videos with you if you are experiencing something like this, so that we can help bring you back down to earth. But of course, if this is really truly tugging on you and it's bringing up a whole lot for you, I really want you to seek out professional help, and as always, call 911 in case there's an emergency. But I want to keep pushing through with you as we kind of keep discussing these attachment losses and how intense and important they are. I don't care if you're 16, 15, 23, 54, 92. It is important and it is affecting you, okay? And so these attachment things get us from the moment of conception. That's why I'll always say you matter from the moment of conception until the moment you die. You are worthy and worthwhile, and you matter. Your existence matters. You're going through a crisis of existence, but you matter. You're here on purpose for a purpose. So I want to share that with you, and we'll move into part 3, and we'll just keep plugging away at these fun, foundational, really intense, really deep concepts. So you take care, and I'll see you next time.